He didn't even look at us, just pointed, and suddenly, I belonged to the Alpha General. The word belong tasted like rust in my mouth. 5 of us stood barefoot in the mud, the last of our Omega ranks after a war that didn't have the decency to end with winners, only people still standing. The line smelled like damp wool and fear. Behind me someone's breath stuttered. To my right, a boy with ash-gray eyes clutched his elbows until the knuckles went bloodless. We were not chosen for our names, or our faces, or for any version of hope. We were chosen because we were there. I'm Finn, 23 Omega by birth, inconvenient by temperament. The type who laughs when told to kneel, and then kneels because he's not stupid, and then laughs again because if you don't, you start to rust from the inside. He pointed. The Alpha General. Tall, broad-shouldered, coat black as a shut door. A face carved in stone, all planes and edges, nothing soft enough to grab onto. He didn't search our faces for fear or compliance. He didn't weigh our bodies like cattle. He just lifted a gloved hand, pointed, and the officer next to him said, "That one," as if naming a tool. Me. Cold air slid under my shirt. Somebody exhaled, relieved it wasn't them. I made a small sound that could have been a laugh or a cough. I stepped forward because feet are traitors. They carry you even when the rest of you tries to bolt. The general didn't reach for me. He didn't touch my arm. He turned, quiet, sure, and I followed like a shadow that hated its job. We crossed what used to be a road and became a scar. Burned-out trucks sat like broken teeth along the ditch. The sky was the kind of flat white that makes you think the light itself is tired. I told myself something witty. You wanted adventure, Finn? Congratulations, your luggage. But the words didn't hit their mark. Humor's an unreliable friend. It shows up late to the worst parties. He walked like the ground belonged to him. Not arrogance. Ownership. A body that had fought for the right to move this way and didn't apologize for taking space. When we reached a jeep, he opened the back and nodded. An order without sound. I climbed in. A soldier in the passenger seat kept glancing at me like I might explode into teeth at any second. The general drove. I counted things to anchor myself. 6 dents on the dashboard. A hairline crack in the windshield radiating like frost. The way the general's hands sat on the wheel. Steady, economical, unyielding. I tried to name the color of his eyes in the rear view, but he didn't meet it. Good. I wasn't sure what I'd do if he did. So, I said, because silence gnaws, is this where I make a stirring speech about unity, and you grunt once to indicate character development? The soldier coughed. The general didn't grunt. He didn't move. I felt my mouth curve anyway. It's a terrible habit, tossing jokes at closed doors and calling it conversation. We left the shattered outskirts of my home territory and entered the clean geometry of theirs. Fences straight as a ruler. Watchtowers like punctuation marks that didn't trust endings. The camp rose from the ground in neat rectangles, barracks with sheet metal roofs, a motor pool that smelled like oil and insistence, a long mess hall with smoke ribboning from vents. Boots thudded in rhythm, voices moved in clipped lines. Discipline lived here like a god. The jeep rolled through the gate after a guard checked the general's papers and my existence. We stopped beside a low building with a single painted stripe across the door. He got out. I hesitated a heartbeat. Not defiance exactly, just the stubborn need to own 1 second that wasn't given to me. He waited. Not patient, not impatient. A mountain doesn't hurry you. You either climb or you don't. I climbed. Inside the air was warmer, metal corridors, the faint sting of disinfectant. We passed rooms with open doors where men rolled maps flat and whispered over them like prayers. I expected to be led to a communal space. A cot squeezed between 2 strangers, a rope for a curtain. He stopped at a door I hadn't noticed until it was the only thing in my world. He opened it, a room, not a cell, too careful for that. Narrow bed with white sheets that pretended to be soft. A small dresser, a basin, a high window that looked like it preferred sky to faces. My stomach tightened on reflex because kindness can be a weapon if you've only known it as bait. I stood in the doorway while the general stepped aside so I could pass. He didn't crowd me. He didn't take up more space than gravity demanded. When I looked at him, he wasn't looking back. He studied some unimportant point beyond my shoulder, like it had saved his life once, and he was paying his respects. "This is not what I expected," I said carefully, because sometimes words are glass, and sometimes they're teeth. I was prepared to be. He turned his head a fraction, the first real movement since his finger claimed me from a line of mud and trembling. The color of his eyes wasn't cold. Cold suggests change if you warm it. His were stillness, lake at dawn stillness. Dangerous if you forget what's under it. Prepared to be what, Finn? A possession? A replacement? A ghost in someone else's grief? "You'll sleep here," the soldier said quickly, as if filling the quiet could save him from it. "Meals at 6 and 18. Do not—" He stopped when the general's hand lifted 2 inches, a quieting gesture so restrained it felt more promise than threat. And then he spoke, no, not a speech, a single word, low and even like it had been weighed before release. "Rest." I blinked. I'd expected commands, inventories, a list of my uses couched in strategy. The word touched down and didn't break anything. He set a key on the small table by the bed, the metal clinking once, precise. He withdrew his hand like the table might bruise. He stepped back into the corridor, and the soldier followed, because soldiers follow. The door remained open. No lock slid, no bolt sang. I stood there, the key staring at me with its single eye, and understood that quiet can be a larger room than noise. I washed my hands in the basin until the water went cool, watching the dirt spiral away. My reflection in the metal curve was any scared boy's, wide-eyed, mouth too quick for its own. Good, back straight like a dare. 23 and still learning where to put all the stubborn. I thought about the others in that line. I thought about the general's hand, how it had reached without reaching, pointed without calculation. Had he chosen me at random? Was I a number picked by a man who didn't want to count anymore? On the dresser, someone had left a folded shirt and a pair of socks that didn't itch at first touch. The shirt smelled faintly of smoke and cedar, like a memory of a winter I'd never had. I put it on and it fell right, which annoyed me for no good reason. I sat on the bed. It held me like a statement, not a question. I listened. Outside the camp spoke in its hard language, orders, engines, the distant clatter of trays. Somewhere above, a gull cried like something that dreamed of oceans and woke to fences. My chest hurt and I told myself it was the new air. My eyes burned and I told myself it was the soap. He didn't touch me. He didn't claim anything but logistics. Some people are hurricanes. Arden, though I didn't know his name yet, was a pressure system, a weather pattern you only understand when it has already decided your season. I lay back and stared at the ceiling until it stopped being blank and started being a surface I could hang thoughts on. "Rest," he'd said. As if he believed it was something I could do on command. As if the word could reach into my ribcage and smooth whatever was clawing around in there. I didn't know why the lack of hands on me scared me more than the idea of them would have. Maybe because hands I could fight. I could bite, claw, negotiate, beg. I could use humor like a blade, but silence, a room. A key placed carefully on a table like a line someone drew and didn't cross. I turned my head. The door was still open. The general was gone. And for the first time since the pointing finger, since the mud and the breath and the rust taste, I understood that not being touched could be its own kind of claim. The first days blurred together, like ink running in rain. Wake, eat, pretend to rest, repeat. My new world was narrow. 4 clean walls, a cot that didn't squeak, and a door that stayed unlocked but carried the weight of every pair of eyes in camp. The soldiers didn't need chains. Suspicion was iron enough. Everywhere I went, heads turned. Their gazes clung to me as if waiting for me to prove them right. Fragile, sly, dangerous in all the wrong ways. Arden, though. Arden didn't look at me at all. He didn't shadow me with rules. No orders barked, no curfews nailed to my door. He didn't even acknowledge, the nervous shuffle of his men when I crossed the yard alone. But when I lifted my head from a bowl of stew and caught him in the distance, his posture was an answer in itself. Solid, immovable, the kind of presence you feel in your bones before your eyes find him. My room was simple, yes, but it was mine. I couldn't decide if that was generosity or another kind of cage. The sheets were always clean, the basin never ran out of water. Once, someone left a pair of boots at my door, sturdy, my size, laces tucked neatly inside. No note, no acknowledgement. It smelled faintly of him. Smoke, leather, and something older, colder. I pushed them under the bed. Meals were the worst. The mess hall stretched wide and metallic, clattering with trays and boots and voices tuned to the same key of obedience. The air was thick with the smell of roasted meat, grease, and too many alphas in one room. My skin prickled under it. I held my tray like a shield. I cracked jokes into the void. "Smells like victory," I muttered once, and someone nearly dropped their fork. Another time, "Bet your mothers would be proud if they could smell past the oil slick." A couple soldiers snorted before catching Arden's silhouette in the doorway and snapping back into silence. He didn't reprimand me. He didn't say a word. He just crossed the room like gravity disguised as a man, his boots sure against the steel floor, and sat at the end of the table with a plate he hardly touched. His face was stone. Always stone. I tested him like a child poking a statue waiting for cracks. I lingered near him in the corridors, humming under my breath, trailing a half-step closer than propriety allowed. I made comments loud enough for him to hear. Nothing. Once walking beside him, I leaned in until our shoulders nearly brushed. I expected him to shove me back, to bare teeth, to at least breathe sharper. He didn't even twitch. It was infuriating. "You're really committed to the strong silent type, huh?" I whispered, half hoping he'd shove me down the nearest stairwell. He kept moving, face cut from the same unyielding stone as always. And then, irony's cruel trick, when I actually slipped. It was late, steps slick with rain. My boot caught the edge, the world tilted, and for half a heartbeat I tasted the weightless panic of falling. A hand closed around my wrist, not careful, not hesitant. A grip like forged iron, pulling me upright in a single motion. The snap of muscle and command. My chest slammed into his arm before balance returned. For one breath my pulse hammered against him. Then just as quickly he let go. No words, no expression. He stepped back, hand falling to his side as if it had never left his sheath. His gaze didn't search my face, didn't linger on the tremor in my fingers. He moved on, boots steady on the steps, stone face unbroken. But I felt the imprint of his hand long after. Heat, bruiseless but undeniable, as if his skin had branded me with the truth he refused to show. He would not look at me, he would not claim me, but he would not let me fall. That somehow was worse than silence. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, replaying the motion over and over, the swiftness, the certainty, the way his body reacted faster than his mask allowed. Arden's face was stone. But stone remembers fire, and I was starting to think I was the crack waiting to find it. Nights in camp had their own weather. The day's noise cooled into pockets of quiet, and the wind learned how to carry secrets. Boots softened to murmurs, engines to purrs. Fires clinked and breathed like old men. If you stood still long enough, you could hear the place thinking. I didn't stand still. Stillness let thoughts catch me. I went for water, then for air, then for an excuse to not be in my room staring at the ceiling until it introduced itself. The yard smelled like smoke, hot metal, and rain deciding what kind of mess it wanted to be. That's when I heard them. 2 soldiers by a burn barrel behind the motor pool. Voices kept low not because they feared being caught, but because grief knows its volume. "Took her body out himself," one said. "Poking the coals with a rod. Didn't let anyone touch her. Carried her through Red Creek like he was made of something other than blood." "His Omega?" the other asked, already knowing the answer. "His wife," the first said softly, as if the title could still protect her. "Hillpack girl, smart, used to sit with the medics, boss people around in that way that makes you say thank you later. War chews through the best. The second soldier's breath fogged white. They say he didn't speak for 3 days. He speaks now, the first muttered. Just not to anyone who can hurt him back. The barrel popped. The glow painted their faces with a color you only see on nights when too much has already happened. I stood in the dark and held very still, like a bad thought you're trying not to think. My throat felt raw, as if I'd swallowed the smoke, so that was the calculus. A wife, an Omega, lost to the same war that lined me up barefoot in the mud, and turned our names into inventory. He'd been carved hollow in the same storm that blew me here. My chest did something inconvenient. Sympathy is a door you don't always want. Anger is the lock you twist anyway. Was I a replacement part, war compensation and stand-in for a ghost? I took one step back, made the boards complain under my heel. The soldiers turned. Instinct spun my mouth before my feet. Don't mind me, I said. I'm practicing my stealth. How am I doing? Scale of 1 to who's there? They stared, eyes flicking past me into the dark beyond, as if Arden himself might be standing there. He wasn't. The idea of him was heavy enough. Curfew's in 10, one said. Less an order than an offering. Go. I went. The corridor swallowed me whole. In my room the boots someone had left, sturdy, my size, laces obedient, sat where I'd shoved them way under the bed, as if they were hiding from the same thing I was. I didn't pull them out. I lay down in my shirt and listened to the way the camp slept, not deeply, but with one eye open. His. A body carried through Red Creek. The part of me that makes jokes reached for an easy line, and found none. The part of me that survives whispered that I should be colder about this, that I should be tallying exits and favors, that I should treat dead wives like facts, not weather. The part of me that is 23 and stupid about hearts did not obey. Morning arrived because it always does. Light scraped the high window. The mess hall hummed with trays and command, and the tired gratitude of calories. I took my bowl and sat where I could study the doorway, without looking like I was studying the doorway. When Arden appeared, the room adjusted itself around him without being asked. I knew his name now. I'd seen it stitched into a folded map case, Arden, the thread clean and ruthless. Names are handles. I wanted to see if this one moved. He didn't look at me. He never did. But there's a difference between avoidance and absence. Avoidance has shape, it takes effort, it leaves a draft. I spent the day failing to mind my own business. I tried to count fuel drums behind the motor pool, and lost track at 11, because Arden's voice carried from the strategy room in that quiet way loud enough for the right ears. I tried to help a private fix a bent latch and scrape my knuckles on purpose just to feel something immediate. I tried to tell myself I didn't care. By late afternoon rain started again, thin needles stitching the yard to the sky. I caught sight of him taking the steps up to the admin building, face unreadable, shoulders doing that thing where a man holds the world with them and pretends it doesn't cost. I followed, not like a shadow, like a question. He reached the landing, and I took the last few steps faster than I should have, closing the distance until propriety packed its bags. Hey, I said, jaunty, which is the sound humor makes when you're not brave enough to be gentle. Were you always this boring? Or is that a post-war skill? The words hit the air and stood there like suspects. One of the officers nearby went suddenly very interested in the paperwork he was not holding. Rain ticked against the window like fingers drumming on a table. I lifted my chin, ready to ride the shove or the snarl or the don't you ever. Arden stopped. Not just in his feet, in his breath, in something deeper you don't get to see unless you're rude enough to make your own luck. He turned his head, a fraction, which on him was the same as a gasp on anyone else. His eyes met mine. For a second they were not stone, not warm, not soft, nothing so easy, but alive. Like something under ice remembering it used to be river. His voice came out low, the edges even. Each word checked for sharpness before it left his mouth. Better silent than broken. Not a threat, not an apology. A weather report. I had a comeback ready, two actually. I had a joke about mimes and a worse one about cement. They died quietly somewhere between my throat and my tongue. because there, in the space between us, I heard what he hadn't said. I tried talking. It cost me. I survived by stopping. Don't make me spend more than I can pay. He didn't wait to see if I understood. He turned and walked down the hall, boots steady, coat whispering along his legs like tide against pier. The officers breathed again. The rain kept time. I stood in that borrowed quiet until a private almost ran into me, whispered sorry, and fled like he'd bumped a statue that might remember how to move. Then I went back outside and let the weather hit my face for a while so I could blame it for whatever my eyes were doing. That night, sleep didn't just avoid me, it left the country. I lay awake with the ceiling repeating its one trick and listened to the fire barrel whisper to itself somewhere beyond the walls. I thought about the men who'd said wife like the word was fragile. I thought about Arden's hand on my wrist, iron when I fell, air when I stood. I thought about how cruelty is often clumsy and kindness, when it's cautious, can cut. I was angry at him, at the war, at whoever decided we were categories before we were people, at myself for being stupid enough to ache for a man who didn't want to be seen. But under the anger, soft as a bruise you press when you shouldn't, was the truth I didn't want. He wasn't made of stone. He'd poured himself into it and stayed there because the alternative hurt more. Better silent than broken, he'd said. I rolled the words around in my mouth like a coin I might someday spend. Better silent than broken, maybe, on some days. On others, silence is a kind of break you can't set right because you never admit it's there. I didn't know which kind this was for him. I only knew that the line between us had moved. Not much. Half an inch. The width of a grip on a wrist. The size of a sentence. I stared at the key on my table and felt the camp breathing through the walls. Somewhere a gull cried like it had misread its map. I told myself a joke about birds applying for reassignment and didn't laugh. For the first time since the pointing finger and the open door, the general wasn't just a wall I leaned sarcasm against. He was a person, awful and miraculous, which is to say dangerous, and that felt like the beginning of something I couldn't name yet. Sharp, bright, scary as a first step on a staircase you can't see the top of. I turned out the lamp. The dark settled. The camp kept thinking, and I lay there, not silent, not broken, somewhere stupidly alive in between. I decided it was time to test the stone. Not break it. That would be too easy, too final. Just tap it, see if it rang hollow, see if the cracks the night had shown me were real. So I brought food. It wasn't much. The mess hall slop, improved only by my questionable charm, a bowl of stew I'd stolen an extra sprinkle of herbs for, and bread that looked like it had fought back when sliced. Balancing both, I found the door to his quarters. Strict lines of metal and wood, paint chipped but unbent. The kind of door that didn't open often, at least not for company. I didn't knock. Knocking would have made it formal. I just walked in like a man who had something to prove and nowhere else to put it. His room was exactly as I expected, barren. A desk with a stack of papers squared to perfection. A bed made with military precision. A chair angled as if waiting for no one. The air smelled faintly of smoke and iron. "Wow," I said, stepping in. "Even ghosts would die of boredom in here." "Did you evict them too, or did they leave voluntarily?" Arden looked up from the papers he wasn't really reading. His face didn't move, except for the brief flicker of his eyes at the food in my hands. Then back to my face, unreadable as always. I set the bowl and bread on his desk and plopped myself into the chair across from him before he could protest. "Dinner delivery service. You can tip me in sarcasm or awkward silences." Both accepted. He didn't reply. He didn't throw me out either. Which, frankly, I considered progress. "You know," I went on, tearing a piece of bread, "it's rude to let someone eat alone. Basic camp etiquette. Besides, rumor has it generals starve if they don't have a smart-mouthed omega to keep them entertained." That earned me a stare sharp enough to peel skin. I grinned back like I was bulletproof. Humor was my only armor, and I wore it loud. We sat like that, the stew steaming between us. I pushed the bowl closer to him with a nudge of my fingers. Our hands brushed. Just for a second, it was like striking flint. Heat flared up my arm, an instinctive spark that wasn't mine alone. His body stiffened, breath catching so quietly I almost missed it. My own pulse betrayed me, quick and loud, as if my blood had forgotten whose side it was on. The air thickened, heavy with the kind of pressure that has nothing to do with weather. Neither of us moved. Then he pulled back so fast the chair legs screeched. His hand knocked the cup on the corner of the desk, sending it spinning to the floor with a clang. For a moment Arden's mask cracked, not the surface, but the edges. His jaw tightened, eyes flashing with something raw and unguarded. Rage, but not at me, at himself. At the slip, the tremor that had broken through his walls. I froze, bread half torn in my fingers. My heart raced, not from fear but from knowing that behind all that stone there was fire, and it had just burned him for daring to exist. "Relax," I said softly, more serious than I'd planned. "I wasn't trying to steal your hand, just feeding you." He bent, picked up the cup with a control so tight it looked painful. Set it back on the desk without meeting my eyes. His shoulders were mountains. His silence was an avalanche. I leaned back in my chair, letting the grin return because I needed it, because he needed me to, because otherwise we'd both drown in the crack we'd just seen. "You drop things, you know. It's almost human." That earned me a glare strong enough to burn. But it wasn't the kind of glare that ends things. It was the kind that keeps them going. I tore off another piece of bread, dipped it in the stew, chewed with exaggerated thoughtfulness. Not bad. Needs salt. Or maybe laughter. Hard to tell. His lips pressed thin, his eyes returned to his papers, but his hand trembled once then stilled. I should have shut up. Should have left. Should have let him retreat back into stone. But curiosity is a wicked thing, and so is hope. "You're not indifferent," I murmured, almost to myself. "You're just terrified." His head lifted at that, slow, dangerous. Our gazes met. The silence between us wasn't empty. It was thick, vibrating, a taut string pulled to breaking. His eyes said what his mouth never would. Don't name it. Don't make it real." I looked away first, not because I was afraid, but because I didn't want to break him with the truth he was already choking on. The stew cooled. The bread went stale in my hand. And the man across from me rebuilt his walls stone by stone, even as the echo of heat between our hands refused to leave the room. When I finally stood to go, I tossed him a half smile, the kind that hides more than it shows. "Thanks for dinner," I said lightly. "You're a terrible host, but the company's intriguing." He didn't answer. But when I left, the sound of his breath lingered behind me. Uneven, alive, and far too human for the stone he wanted to be. By the third night of pretending sleep was something you could order from a menu, I snapped. The camp had settled into its late-hour murmur. Boots quiet, engines cooling, fires whispering to themselves, like they knew secrets and were tired of keeping them. The corridor outside my room held the kind of cold that travels. I put my boots on, yes, the ones someone had left like a suggestion, and followed the draft. Arden's door was closed but not locked. That felt like him. Boundaries you could cross if you were willing to pay for the trespass. I didn't knock. Knocking was for people who wanted permission. He was at his desk, coat off, sleeves rolled to the forearms, lamp carving warm hollows into the hard lines of his face. Papers lay squared in front of him, untouched in the way a weapon is untouched right before it's used. "Don't you ever get tired," I said, "of arranging ghosts into neat piles?" His head lifted slow. He didn't speak. That should have been my cue to retreat. I stepped in instead, pulled the door shut with my heel, and let the words I'd been chewing on for days finally cut. "If you don't want me," I said, every syllable a thrown stone, "then why keep me?" Silence didn't fall. It landed, heavy, specific. The lamp hummed. Rain ticked at the window like a bad drummer. His eyes didn't flinch. Mine burned. "I'm not furniture," I went on, throat too tight for jokes. "I'm not a rumor you can store in a spare room. You gave me a key and a quiet and called it mercy. Maybe it is, but it feels like a leash made of air. The muscles in his jaw shifted once, a small quake under a city that pretends it doesn't feel the fault line. You have food, safety, and 100 eyes counting my breaths, I snapped. They look at me like I'm a bomb you parked in your house and forgot to defuse. You won't touch me, won't even say my name out loud, won't claim or release. You keep me where everyone can see I belong to you, except you refuse to act like it. That's not safety, that's limbo. A muscle in his forearm tightened. The lamp threw a clean line of light along the tendon, the skin there marked by old work and older wars. You presume a great deal. I hear things, I said, softer because anger had to move over to make room for something else. About Red Creek. About a wife carried out of a field while the world fell apart and refused to be put back together afterward. I'm sorry. I am. But I won't be the empty place she left. The words were a boundary I drew and then braced for. I expected the cold, the command. The door opening, the escort called. Instead, something in him gave a little, not like a wall collapsing, more like a door that had been swollen by weather easing in its frame. He stood, hands on the desk, not to loom but because standing was the only way to survive the next thing he had to say. Leave, he managed, but the word didn't have edges. It had frayed places. No, I said, and I meant it without bravado. Not this time. I took 2 steps forward until the desk was only a breath between us. The map case on the corner still had his name stitched to it, Arden, thread neat and ruthless. I set my palm on the wood, open, visible, not reaching for him, close enough to count as proximity, far enough to count as respect. You live with your back to a grave you won't look at, I said. And you've built this mausoleum of discipline around it. I get it. It's how you breathe. But I won't be buried here with whatever you won't say. He laughed once. It was rust breaking free, the sound a man makes when a blade he trusted betrays him. He pressed his fingers to the edge of the desk until the knuckles blanched. The tendons jumped under his skin like trapped animals. Because I can't lose again, he said. Not shouted, not flung. Given. The way you set something heavy down and wait to hear if the floor will hold. The room changed shape around the sentence. The rain stopped being a noise and became a curtain. My chest went hollow in a way that didn't feel like emptiness, more like a bell. He didn't look at me. He stared at some exact point just left of my shoulder. When he spoke again, his voice had to climb through something to reach me. You think this is about wanting. It isn't. Want is easy. Want is a fire you feed or starve. Loss, he swallowed. Loss teaches you the shape of the room you can live in. Mine has walls. He was shaking. Barely. Enough that the lamp turned it into a flicker. I carried her, he said. And the past tense climbed into the present like it refused to be kept in its lane. I thought if I was strong enough, careful enough, the ground would understand and give her back. It didn't. It never does. So I learned the lesson. Don't put weight on what can be taken. Don't attach. Don't let anything close enough to become a lever. He inhaled through his nose, steadying like a soldier reloading on an open field. It didn't work. His next breath snagged. His eyes shone and then didn't, as if he had ordered the wetness back into its ducts and been betrayed by biology. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I let him fail at control and peace. Don't look at me like that, he said hoarsely, which of course guaranteed I would. I am not. He faltered, shook his head once almost violently. I command a battalion. I do not break, I offered, and the word was not a taunt. You already did. You survived. That's all a break is sometimes. He startled, as if the idea had teeth. His mouth opened and closed, no sound. The body remembering how to protect what the mind wanted to admit. The first tear didn't fall so much as appear, a sudden proof at the lash line. He blinked hard and it was gone, then not gone. Then he set his palm flat on the desk to steady himself, and the movement pulled a second one free. I wanted to touch him. God, I wanted to bridge that last inch and say the thing my mouth was terrible at. I see you. I am not a replacement. I am not a lever. I am just here. But choice matters. He'd been robbed of too many. So I sat. Not in the chair. On the floor, back to the wall, knees bent, hands open on my thighs. Small, unthreatening, stubborn. I placed myself inside his weather and refused to try to fix it. I won't be her, I said finally, voice low. I won't be your penance either. I am not a debt you pay by starving yourself of living. If you send me away, I'll go. If you keep me like this, I'll rust. If you want... I swallowed. The second half of the sentence was a cliff. If you want, I can just stay. Not as a ghost, not as a monument, as a person in a room with you. Breathing. The lamp hummed. Somewhere a pipe ticked as if the building had a heartbeat. He made a noise that might have been a laugh if it hadn't been cracked through with something older. I don't know how, he said, voice wrecked down to thread. To be without the count, without the fear. Me neither, I admitted. But I'm very good at learning things the wrong way first. A smile tried to climb onto my mouth out of habit. I didn't let it. We can fail at it together. He leaned back, the chair creaking in a startled way like furniture wasn't used to being included in moments. He dragged a hand over his face, breath shuddering, and when he dropped it, his eyes were red at the edges, human, alive in a way that made my own chest ache clean. For a long time that was it. He breathed. I breathed. The rain softened its fingers on the window. The air shifted from charged to simply near. Finn, he said at last. My name in his mouth felt like a door opening and a step taken through it. He'd said mine. Not Omega, not you. Finn. I closed my eyes for 1 second and let it land. Yes, I said. Leave the door, he murmured, voice almost gone. Open. I stood, knees popping, and did as he asked. The corridor's colder breath walked into the room and didn't mind us. I didn't touch him when I passed the desk. I set the cup he'd knocked over last time in a safer place. He noticed. The corner of his mouth moved, not smile, not. At the threshold I looked back. He wasn't stone. Not tonight. He was a man sitting at a table, hands empty and finally allowed to be, with a storm outside and another one he was learning to call weather. I'm down the hall, I said. Not far. He nodded. I left the door open and went to my room with my heart loud enough to be mistaken for trouble. I sat on my bed, shoes still on, and stared at the key on the table. It hadn't changed. I had. Honesty isn't a victory, it's a risk. It felt like one I could live with. Night taught the camp to whisper. Engines cooled into ticks. The watch called the hour like it didn't trust clocks, and the rain finally took a breath. My door sat open to the corridor's thin draft. Arden's request, my permission. Sleep, however, had decided to bivouac somewhere else. I tried all the tricks, counted dents in the ceiling paint, recited, in order, the least charming moments of my life, concentrated on breathing until my lungs felt like stubborn instruments. Nothing held. The open door kept looking like a road, so I put on the boots I'd been pretending not to be grateful for, and followed the draft down the hall. Arden's door was not quite closed. I tapped the frame anyway, courtesy, not caution, and eased it wider. The lamp on his desk threw a cone of amber over paper edges and the straight line of a shoulder. He sat as if conversation had been attempted and abandoned. When he turned, the light caught his eyes in a way that made me feel seen and then, blessedly, not hunted for it. I can't sleep, I said, which felt like saying I am human in a place that worshipped steel. He gestured toward the chair across from him, a permission so small it could be missed if you weren't starving for it. I sat. We looked at one another like the room was full of fragile things, words maybe, or breath. We didn't talk, not at first. The silence this time was different from all the others. It had a shape we'd both agreed to inhabit. My hands rested uselessly on my knees. His stayed flat on the desk as if the wood might float him through the moment. There's a storm, I said, because filling the air with anything felt better than letting the past rush in. Outside, not in. For once. He huffed something that almost remembered laughter. Almost. Then he did something I never would have predicted. He rose, came around the desk, and took the other chair, the one beside me instead of opposite. The room shifted its furniture of assumptions to accommodate that fact. We sat shoulder to shoulder, not touching, not quite breathing the same air. The lamp hummed. The window had turned into a square of polished black, reflecting two people who had been poor at honest things and were trying to learn. He lifted his hand and let it hover, an offering he didn't seem sure how to complete. I looked at it, large, steady, the hand that had hauled me upright without permission, and placed mine in it. Heat, not the flare of instinct I'd felt when our fingers grazed over stew. Not the pressure that builds behind ribs when biology starts chanting. A warmer thing, quieter, older than any rank. My pulse beat into his palm, and after a breath, his answered, a second metronome settling in beside mine. We stayed like that a long time, long enough for the lamp to gather a halo of warmth around the shade, long enough for the muscles in my forearm to stop trying to translate touch as threat, long enough to believe that something had been changed simply by weathering the same minute together. I used to think, he started, and stopped the sentence like it was a horse that might bolt. Me too, I said, which was either confession or joke. I meant the first and let it be both. His thumb moved once against the side of my hand, a slow, uncertain arc. The tremor that had haunted him earlier was gone. He was steady now, and not because he had armored himself, because he had put something down. I turned my wrist, threaded our fingers. The click of it nearly undid me. Want is easy, he'd said. He was right. This was not easy. This was a choice made in a room that had needed a key for too long. I shifted closer until my shoulder found the line of his arm, and when he didn't flinch, the relief in my chest was almost painful. I'm bad at quiet, I warned, because I am who I am even at the edge of something sacred. You're learning, he said, and there was warmth in it, a wryness so light it could have floated. The first joke we'd ever managed without armor. I turned, and he turned, and our foreheads knocked like stones discovering they could be soft. We both breathed a laugh that had barely survived its childhood. My free hand rose of its own accord, then decided to ask permission by pausing halfway. He closed the small distance, and pressed his temple into my fingers like a man making a pact with the present. Finn, he said, and the name sounded different now, less like a checkpoint, more like a step. I tilted my head and kissed him. It wasn't practiced, it wasn't precise. It felt like the first swallow of water after a day spent pretending thirst is dignified. A brush, then another, the kind of gentle that requires courage. He went still for a breath the way a field stills when wind remembers its manners, and then he leaned, not a surge, not a claim, an answer. We found a small rhythm and stayed inside it. The chair creaked complainingly, so we stood without actually letting go of anything, just rising on the same motion. And he nudged us the 3 steps to the bed with a care that embarrassed me, because tenderness had been so scarce I'd forgotten it existed. We sat. He rested his forehead against mine again like he was repeating a spell to make sure it held. His hand left mine to push a stray curl from my eye, fingers barely there, as if I were made of the same brittle material he'd been guarding for years. I took his hand back and placed it on my chest, over the honest pound of me. See, I said, the word a small cloud between us. Alive. His mouth crooked, not quite a smile. Yes, a beat. Alive. When we kissed again, it wasn't the hunger of instinct. It was a map. Slow lines, the careful naming of places we had both sworn off. He touched my jaw, my throat, the hinge of my shoulder, as if reacquainting himself with the idea that bodies could be homes and not battlefields. I matched him, learning his language, the scar under his wrist that jumped when I traced it, the way his breath caught when I smoothed my palm between his shoulder blades, the low sound he made when I stayed in that place too long. Clothes complicated, and then didn't. We didn't tear, didn't rush. Fabric slid, skin met skin, and the shock of heat was not the roar of a fuse but the glow of a hearth. We lay down because gravity prefers honesty. He kissed my knuckles like he was apologizing to them for every time he'd kept his hands empty on purpose. When he finally pressed his face to my throat and let one breath go ragged, I felt the wet there. Small, salt, undeniable. He didn't pull back. He didn't apologize. A second tear followed the first, and his chest hitched, and the sound he made could have broken me if breaking hadn't been the point we were refusing to fear. "I'm here," I said into his hair, which smelled like rain and smoke and whoever he was without the rank. "I'm here." He nodded, the motion a tremor against my collarbone, and kept breathing. I kept my palm at his nape, the other at the center of his back, feeling the knot of him loosen one slender thread at a time. The room, which had always felt too neat for living, warmed around us, not by lamp or blanket, but by the silly miracle of two people choosing. When the last of the distance lowered its weapons, we moved together, slow, patient, listening, not claiming, not proving. Not because some ancient biology wrote its orders in our blood, though I could feel that drumbeat offering itself. Because we said yes. Because we had both been denying oxygen, and, for once, decided to breathe. After, the world didn't end or improve its manners. The rain returned to its soft argument with the window. The lamp hummed like a contented thing. He lay on his side facing me, our hands between us, fingers still interlaced, our thumbs trading absent-minded strokes, like the most important conversation in the world. He looked wrecked and remade, eyes rimmed red, mouth bruised by tenderness, a man who had put down something heavy and discovered the floor held. I felt wrecked and remade too, though I would have sold it as swagger if you'd asked. He touched my cheekbone with the backs of his fingers, the way you do when you've run out of words you trust. I leaned into it. I didn't defeat you, I thought, and didn't say, because the sentence was mine to carry, not his to hear yet. I stayed. He must have read something in my face anyway. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" I asked. "For not making me choose between silence and ruin." "That's not a binary," I murmured, because I was still me. "There's also inappropriate jokes, a ghost of a smile. Those I find are becoming tolerable." "Careful," I said. "Today tolerable, tomorrow a lifestyle." He huffed that almost laugh again, and then the quiet folded around us in a way that wasn't empty at all. We didn't sleep quickly. Sleep came like a shy animal, circling, testing, finally settling between us with its head on our joined hands. Outside, the camp kept its watch. Inside, we kept ours, not from fear, but from the fragile astonishment of being allowed to rest. When I finally let my eyes close, I held on to one bright, stubborn certainty: this wasn't victory over a man. It was the moment a door opened and we both walked through. Morning made the lamp's halo a pale ring on the desk, and turned the window from black glass into a square of thin, forgiving light. The camp woke in its usual key: boots, orders, the clack of trays. But it all sounded a step farther away, like we'd moved one room deeper into the world overnight. Arden was already awake, on his side, watching me like I was a thing he'd been learning how to look at without bracing. Not cold. Quiet, yes, but the kind that has soft edges. "Hi," I said brilliantly, because eloquence is famously strongest at dawn. His mouth tipped, small. "Hi." We lay there another minute with our hands still tangled, as if any sudden movement might alert old ghosts to come reclaim their territory. He glanced toward the open door, the one we'd left as a promise, and then back at me with a decision settling in his shoulders. "This place took too much," he said, voice low and steady. "Let's build something that gives back." The sentence landed like a key in a lock. I felt my heart push against my ribs in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "You're serious?" "Yes, you." General stone face. "Volunteering to be harbor master?" I raised a brow. "Clinic director? Omega's anonymous treasurer?" "Don't make me revoke the decision," he said, but there was warmth threaded through it. He brushed his thumb over my knuckles. "Once. I'm resigning my command. The battalion has officers ready. They won't thank me for staying past the end of my usefulness. And me? You aren't a post, he said. You're a person. You choose. I'd never liked being told what to do. Being asked was worse, because it meant picking who I was. Okay, I said, and the word felt new in my mouth, bright and unrusted. Let's build. The day didn't care about epiphanies. It demanded signatures and boxes and people pretending they weren't watching. Arden dressed, the lines of his uniform suddenly too sharp for him. I pulled on my boots, the ones that had waited under my bed like a patient idea, and followed him into the current of the morning. He didn't make a speech. He never would. He called the adjutant to his office, murmured orders that redistributed responsibility like chess pieces moved by a gentle, unarguable hand. A notice was drafted, a seal pressed. A room full of officers stood at attention for a man who had never asked them to do anything but their jobs. When it was done, he set the ring of keys he'd carried for years on the table. They made a sound like a century deciding to be over. Sir? The adjutant asked, trying not to look like a man losing his map. Take care of them, Arden said. He didn't mean the keys. We walked the corridor together. Rules slid off us and tried to follow. We kept going anyway. By the door of my old room I paused. The bed was made, the basin polished, the high window politely ignoring me. I left the key on the table, a quiet thank you to a place that had held me without knowing what to do with me. Outside, the sky was the clean blue of a forehead after a fever. The gate opened with a groan that sounded like relief. We stepped through, and the road didn't become a scar. It became a road. The first weeks were all verbs: find, rent, scrub, convince. We chose a 2-story building on the edge of a river town that hadn't learned to hate itself for surviving. The front steps sagged like a mouth missing a tooth. The windows were stubborn but clear. When I pushed the door for the first time, it complained in a friendly register. Good bones, I thought. Like a person who'd taken some hits and still wanted to stand. We painted. I learned the precise difference between eggshell and you'll never wash blood out of that then, laughed at myself for thinking in old scenes. We ripped out a cracked mirror in the entryway and put up a slate instead. Arden wrote the first rule on it, chalk slow and careful in his thick fingers. No ranks inside. I added a second underneath. Names first. He watched me draw the crooked letters. A hint of a smile as if my handwriting had confessed to crimes. Then he reached for the chalk again, hesitated, and wrote a third. Consent. Always. We built the rooms like we were setting a table. A kitchen that smelled like cinnamon by the second week, because I decided hope comes easier with sugar. A common room with couches that didn't match on purpose, a place for people to sit how they really sit, a small gym that didn't try to bully anyone into being something they weren't. Mats, light weights, space to relearn where your body begins and ends. A clinic space where light fell correctly, not like an interrogation but like morning. A garden out back for herbs and hands that needed dirt to make sense of the day. People came. Not in a rush. War trains you to move in packs or not at all. Healing is more private. A young Omega with a laugh too big for his flinch. A middle-aged Beta who'd held her brother through the worst and needed someone to hold her the ordinary way. A veteran with scars that looked like countries refusing to be borders. We listened. We were bad at it sometimes. We got better. Arden had a way of standing in a doorway without blocking it. He could be still enough to make the space around him calmer, and present enough to make anyone he faced feel like he'd set his whole day aside for them. People brought him their fear, piece by piece, and he carried it like it was what he'd trained for. Sometimes they brought him their anger instead. He carried that too. At night, after the last mug was washed and the last light checked, we sat on the back steps and let the river do its saying. He would lean against my shoulder, a man discovering that leaning is not falling, and we'd plan ridiculous things. A second building, outreach to the packs who still thought shame was policy. A library where every book was stamped with a small sentence. You are not alone. And a wolf's paw the kids begged me to add. Director, I teased once, nudging him with my knee. He made a face. Arden. In here, only Arden. Arden, I said, because names are handles and I wanted to keep using his properly. You look lighter. I am not lighter, he said dryly. Then after a beat, I am less heavy where it counts. We didn't erase the past. It lived with us, as it does in every house anyone has ever made. Sometimes he woke with his breath coming sharp, the old room with its walls reminding him they still knew his measurements. I learned how to be there without turning on all the lights. Sometimes I shut down in the middle of laughter and needed to go count the slats in the porch railing, until my pulse remembered its job. He learned to sit beside me and not fix what wasn't broken, just frayed. On the first day we hung the sign, the sun bothered to come out like it was proud of us. We'd argued names and decided on none of the dramatic ones. Harbor House, the wood read in simple letters. A small crowd had gathered. Neighbors curious, a medic who'd been at too many front lines, 2 omegas who had helped paint and stolen half my cinnamon rolls. Someone started a cheer and stopped, embarrassed, as if joy needed clearance. It's allowed, I said. I waved my arms like a ridiculous flag. Joy is officially permitted on premises. Arden, beside me, squeezed my hand. Publicly. Not to claim, but to anchor. A single ordinary boldness that in another life would have been a revolution. The first official intake we did together. A teenager, rigid with dignity. We didn't ask for his story like it owed us anything. We offered a room, a hot meal, a choice of a blue blanket or a green one. A card with a small useful truth printed on it. You choose the pace. He picked green. He cried only when the soup arrived and no one asked him to be grateful for it. After he helped me label spice jars and told me unprompted that the river sounded like home but less angry. That night, the house breathed different. Not because we'd fixed anyone, because we'd started the work of not breaking them further. We stood in the doorway under our new sign, and watched dusk take its time. Arden turned to me, his face unarmored by anything but the light. Thank you, he said again, the same way he had that first night, setting something heavy down and waiting to see if the floor would hold. For what this time? I asked. For staying, he said simply. Even when I could not promise how I would be, I looked at the windows we'd washed with too much vinegar, at the slate inside with our 3 rules, at the mismatched couches already slouching into themselves like they'd been forgiven for not matching. I looked at him. I didn't defeat you, I said, the sentence finally ready to be spoken out loud, steady and proud as a name. I stayed,